Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt as we are describing our reading through the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass. We are now into Song of Myself, passage number 18. Now we've said before in an earlier lecture that we're working with numbers 17, 18, and 19 as in some ways a subsection of Song of Myself, as Whitman's, I called it integral song, or his universalist kind of song. And here we're going to play around with the idea that sometimes losing is winning. Now, my hope is you've been following us at learnstrong.net, that you have found our playlist there for Talks with Walt, the 24 poems of inscriptions we've now covered. I hope you have the 19 sections of starting from Paumanok, important in our discussion here in a few moments, and of course Song of Myself passages 1 through 17. I hope that you've been following all of that. Now, we're interested as well in the edits, as we were commenting on the previous section. We're interested in some of the edits and additions that will be a part of the final deathbed edition of this poem. Let's just quickly read it first in the deathbed edition, and then we'll come back to hear it as it's related to us in the 1855 edition. With music strong I come, with my cornets and my drums. I play not marches for accepted victors only. I play marches for conquered and slain persons. Have you heard that it was good to gain the day? I also say it is good to fall. Battles are lost in the same spirit in which they are won. I beat and pound for the dead. I blow through my embouchures my loudest and gayest for them. Vivas to those who have failed, and to those whose war vessels sank in the sea, and to those themselves who sank in the sea, and to all generals that lost engagements, and to all overcome heroes, and the numberless unknown heroes equal to the greatest heroes known. Now, the 55 edition of this poem actually begins with a different line, so I just want to play around with this for a moment. Let's just read it, and again I'll point out the lines that are new. This is, again, a brand new line. This is the trill of 1,000 clear cornets and scream of the octave flute and strike of triangles. I play not a march for victors only. I play great marches for conquered and slain persons. Have you heard that it was good to gain the day? I also say it's good to fall. Battles are lost in the same spirit in which they're won. I sound triumphal drums for the dead. I fling through my embouchures the loudest and gayest music to them. Vivas to those who have failed, and to those whose war vessels sank in the sea, and those themselves who sank in the sea, and to all generals that lost engagements, and all overcome heroes, and the numberless unknown heroes equal to the greatest heroes known. Now let's go to work with these lines. Notice, first of all, we will start with the word music. With music strong I come. Of course, significance that he uses the word come. It's the first word of the deathbed edition if you're looking at the epigraph. And then, of course, how many times through the poems already have we heard this word come or coming? With music strong. Now think about the power of music. So for example, in passage 9 of Song of Myself, you'll remember strains musical flowing through the ages, right? That's one of so many that we could point out. To a certain Cantrecechi, we studied in the inscriptions passage as well. With music strong I come, with my cornets and my drums. Of course, this will be war music and war instruments as well. I play not marches for accepted victors only. I play marches for conquered and slain persons. Now, go back to learnstrong.net and find our full lecture on Emily Dickinson's classic, Success is Counted Sweetest. Do you remember these set of lines? Success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. To comprehend a nectar requires sorest need. Not one of all the purple host who took the flag today can tell the definition so clear of victory as he defeated dying, on whose forbidden ear the distant strains of triumph burst, agonized and clear. Now we say in our discussion of this poem at learnstrong.net that Dickinson is making a profoundly important insight, especially given that obviously these lines will so much be read in light of the 4-year horror that we today call the Civil War. Notice that Whitman will play the game. He says, I play, back to the word game again, as we said from passage 4, not marches for accepted victors only. I play marches for conquered and slain persons. In other words, Whitman says, I want to be the poet for the living, for the victors, but also for the losers and the slain and the dead. Now, obviously, in terms of 1855, we're not yet talking about the great contest between the North and the South. But by the deathbed edition, all readers of these lines will understand that what he's saying is, I am going to write poetry for both the North as well as the South. And then he uses this construction that sounds familiar to us from something like, starting from Paumanok, passage 13, was somebody asking, that was the opening of that line here, have you heard that it was good to gain the day? Now, gain the day here, of course, means to be victorious, especially in battle. I also say it's good to fall. Battles are lost in the same spirit in which they are won. Go back to starting from Paumanok. Guys, I told you, learning to read starting from Paumanok, Whitman put it there for a reason. It will help you to be able to read lines like this. Do you remember in passage 7 of starting from Paumanok, borrowing heavily from Emerson's notion that he says there is in fact no evil, and if there was, blah, blah, blah. We're playing a very similar game here. Notice he says it's good to fall. Wow, that's an interesting line. It's good to not succeed. It's good to struggle. Here, of course, he's speaking directly to our big five in the theodicy question. Why must there be so much pain? Because it's important. It's a propadeutic, sounding very much, of course, like Plato's Republic, especially book 7, right? Fear and pain, so important in our education. He says it's good to fall. Battles are lost in the same spirit which they're won. We have to think, of course, about Shakespeare's opening lines of Macbeth, when the battle's lost and won, right? As we heard those lines, and we've given lectures on that. And then, of course, the edited lines, right? I beat and pound for the dead. Now, of course, we're going to get to this beating and pounding for the dead in drum taps. And later in Leaves of Grass, there will be a celebration of these. Notice the repetition of I for the anaphoria. I blow through my embouchures, right? That is to say the mouthpiece for wind instruments. It's also, of course, the shape the mouth and lips make in blowing, right? My loudest and gayest for them. In other words, I will write poems and songs of tribute, not for the winners, for the losers. Whitman is the great poet of the underdog. He's the great poet of the losers. Why? Because he himself spent most of his life an underdog and a loser, an outsider, we would probably say. He uses the term vivas, in other words, celebration, the French, to those who have failed. Notice that we'll have all of these exclamation points. Do you see them? Viva to those who have failed, and to those whose war vessels sank in the sea, and to those themselves who sank in the sea. I can't help but think of the lines from Dry Salvage's passage 3, right? You who come to port, and you whose bodies will suffer the trial and judgment of the sea. We've given full lectures on the Dry Salvage's part 3 lines. He says, I'm also giving vivas to all generals that lost engagements. We obviously will think of the American Civil War, and all overcome heroes. We think about the last passage of Beowulf, of course, and the dragon getting Beowulf, and the numberless unknown heroes. Notice the repetition of the use of heroes here. Equal to the greatest heroes, that's the third one, known. In other words, it is true that, as Voltaire says, victors write the histories. But Whitman says, I want to reclaim the histories of those who were never winners and therefore couldn't write the histories. I want to encompass everyone. In other words, at 2a, he is saying, losing is another kind of winning. And I want to write poems to celebrate the losers as well as the winners. At 2b, well, we've commented on the added and the edited lines. I want to point out as well the use of the exclamation points, which if you look in the 55 edition isn't there, which begs the question, why do you think Whitman decided to go ahead and add all of these exclamation points? You know, it is a way, obviously, to show emphases. At 3A, well, we've obviously mentioned, Emily Dickinson's classic, Success is Counted Sweetest by Those Who Never Succeed. I want to think about Dante, though, and especially passage 24 in Canto 24. Up on your feet, this is no time to tire. The man who lies asleep must never wake in fame, and his desire slip past him like a dream. You'll remember in that passage that Dante the pilgrim is devastated and tired. It will be Virgil the guide who will say, no, you got to get up. We got to keep going. And then finally, think about how Iliad and Odyssey and Aeneid are in fact songs. Well, they are songs, of course, for losers, but they're also songs for winners, aren't they? I mean, think about that. We have in the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, don't we? We have great examples of the ways in which you have a song for not just winners, but also for losers. Finally, of course, at 3B, you can kind of predict this one is coming. What is your greatest loss? And from that greatest loss, what is it that you won, that you learned, you gained, and therefore you have to say, it's not that I want to do the loss again. I would prefer to not have to do it, but it is true that I learned something really important about myself, ontologically, psychologically, as well as others, sociologically. Now let's finish. If we say that passage 17, 18, and then 19 are a group, let's come back now to work 19 and to see this universal integral voice of Whitman's that's so remarkable. Thank you.